What's up, guys, and welcome back to the infamous project. We got sunshine and blue skies today, which I am so thankful for after that week long of cloud, rain, cold, and I had to work in it when I was doing the four-banger swap over here. But today the weather is nice, the birds are chirping, everything is good. So I've got this 1990 GT called the DR. I call it the disaster recovery, and the owner begs to differ. He calls it the diamond in the rough. And you know what? It's a pretty cool car. He found it in a field or next to a barn in some farmer's field. Let's just put it that way. And he said there was plants and maybe probably weeds growing out from the underside of the hood. And as you can see, it looks pretty rough on the outside. But when you open up the door, I actually put some of my touch on this one. There we go, nice and black. He's got the seats out of another one of his Mustangs that were recovered at some point. They actually look really nice. I like the pattern of these. Couldn't tell you who did it, guys. Don't ask the questions. I know he's from the San Antonio area, so probably an upholstery shop down there. You know, like new leather wrapped wheel. Everything is nice and tidy and clean. And well, he's been having some issues with this car. It's like, man, it's not running right. It's, you know, blowing smoke and popping and pinging under load. And so a hard lesson was learned when his son towed the car here. They got a U-Haul dolly, pulled the front end up onto the dolly, put the car in neutral. It is a 5-speed manual car. Just put it in neutral and towed it all the way here. So probably an hour and a half. By the time it got here, you could hear just something wasn't right. And well, they cooked the transmission. And you might be like, well, they had it in neutral. How'd they cook the transmission? I thought that only applied to automatics. Well, it doesn't just apply to automatics. Also applies to 5-speed. So clutch is in. I can't get it in the third. I can't get it in the fourth. Like fifth and reverse, they're all non-existent. First and second are the only two gears that are there. And if you should hear when this thing is trying to move underneath power, like it honestly, it sounds so bad, even in neutral. Here, I'll let you guys hear it in neutral. Okay, my foot's on the clutch, watch this. The car was actually trying to inch its way forward a little bit. So what happened? Well, angle of the car was like this being towed, either the transmission being low on fluid or just too much angle. The fluid goes down towards the tail shaft of the transmission. Parts are still rotating even though you're in neutral. So needless to say, the front parts and components of the transmission, I'm no transmission expert, guys, so I don't have the terminology for it. I'm just speaking in layman's terms here. Fluid isn't up in the top. Parts are trying to move. They're not lubricated, and well, they'll seize up. And that's pretty much what happened. So what do we need to do now? We need to change the transmission. The good news is, I thought I needed to change the motor as well because, you know, going back to the whole running and driving, popping and pinging issues. But let's go into the shop here so that I can show you guys what I found. So to be honest with you guys, based on the history of this car and what's gone on with it in its past lifetime of motors, I probably just would have yanked the motor out without even thinking about it. But something happened yesterday that may have saved the situation. And when I first got the 4-banger car running, I had an aftermarket distributor that I installed into it. And for whatever reason, it wasn't seating down all the way in this area here. I don't know why, it just wasn't. So, you know, I couldn't get the, I guess the clamp or the tension chunk, whatever you want to call that, down to hold and keep the distributor from moving. The distributor was sitting maybe 1/8 of an inch up. Now, everything was okay in reality, I just didn't like the way that it was positioned. So I was driving my OCD nuts. I'm like, you know what? Motor in the DR is most likely gonna have to come out. Let me see if I take the distributor out of that. So I pop off the cap and check this out, guys. Never have I seen the end of the rotor just, I don't know what the hell happened, to be honest. It looks like burnt off, fell off, snapped off. Everything else in the distributor looked fine. So I was like, of course the car is not gonna run right. Like, how could you expect it to do anything? And funny enough, it would idle fine like this. And probably because it's spinning so slow, the spark has enough time to make proper contact with all the points on the underside of the cap. And then when you start to put it under load, or this thing starts spinning faster, the sparks are probably arcing and probably creating misfire and double sparking and everything else. So I took the distributor out, put it in the 4-banger car. It sat down perfectly, of course, OEM part, so it's gonna sit in there right. And then I took the aftermarket distributor and I stuck it in that motor, and it actually went all the way down. So I'm not sure if maybe it's just a little bit of a tolerance or whatever it might be. And I tried it multiple times. It would not seat down in that freshly rebuilt motor properly. So I decided, whatever. If it wants to live in the other motor, fine, then we'll let it live in that. I put a new rotor on there and the car starts up and seems to run really, really well. Now, I need to be able to drive it to test it and make sure that the car is running and driving properly, which means I need to put a transmission in the car. So today we're gonna be doing another transmission. The weather is nice and I am gonna do it outside in the driveway on the ground. I'd love to put it up on the lift, but the car barely wants to move and I'd have to move these cars out of the way. So to me, the path of least resistance is screw it. I'm doing it in the driveway. So I'm gonna jack the car up, gonna drain the fluid out of the transmission and pull the H pipe off. What else do we gotta do? Pull the speedo cable out, do those few things, and hopefully get the transmission swapped so that the car is in a state where we can drive it, and hopefully everything's gonna check out, so stay tuned. All right, guys, so safety's first. Car is jacked up, 2 jack stands, double locking jack stands. Got our wheels chalked here to make sure nothing wants to roll forwards or backwards, and even got the jack underneath the front of the K-member there. This should give us enough room to operate. It sucks dealing with stuff on the ground, it really does, but that is the reality that we have to work with sometimes. So the only thing that might be a little bit of a challenge are the drive shaft bolts. Hopefully they're lined up in a good spot. If they're not, then might need to actually come back, jack up the diff so we can turn things and be able to get that drive shaft out. But for now, it's time to drain the transmission fluid. And while that's draining, we can start unbolting the H pipe. Who did this exhaust? They deserve a damn throat punch. It's all solid. Unbelievable. It's gonna make life a lot more challenging. All right, I got sidetracked. Ricky stopped by. We had to do some drive shaft measurements and power steering line measurements for the ramp truck there, as that thing is pretty much ready to go. But he also did help me pull the transmission out of the car, and it's a damn shame. This thing was all freshened up. You can see it's pretty clean overall. But now we're gonna go ahead and get this guy sorted. Gonna get the shifter bolted on. Actually, we're gonna top it up with fluid. So we're gonna get this thing filled up with fluid here, 2.5 quarts. I've got my trusty old shaft here that I'm using to make sure that the fluid stays in the transmission when I go to install it. I'm gonna pull this mount off and or this cross brace off, and we'll reuse the one that was in the car, and hopefully get this thing installed and see how this car does real quick. I just found more stuff, guys. More stuff that you don't want to find in the middle of a job. So let me show you. So this is how not to install a throw bearing. So if you guys can see, the tension spring is not supposed to be on the outside like that. It's actually supposed to be on the back side. So the good news is I don't think there's any significant wear because there isn't that many miles on here. I didn't install this. This was done by somebody else. So I put the motor in, but of course the transmission stayed intact. So you can see throw bearing isn't where it should be. So probably gonna have to pull the clutch cable off here so I can get to that and fix it. All right, transmission's in after lots of wrestling. Little trick for you guys: if your clutch fork or the clutch cables on your clutch fork, disconnect it. It's gonna make your lives a million times easier. Important little trick to know, otherwise you're gonna be wrestling trying to get your transmission in. Sometimes even if you have to just kind of rotate your drive shaft, or if you got a yoke up in there, if you can rotate the U-joint like I had there, sometimes it helps things get seated into place. So now just going to go ahead and get the cross member bolted back up in there, and then we get to put our exhaust back on. And I got some band clamps here, best I could find in short notice, and that will get everything back together. From there it'll be up to him to go to the exhaust shop and get this sorted out, and that's if he even chooses to. This is a daily driver, not a perfect car, not a show car, so that'll be on him on what he wants to do. But let's go ahead and get this cross member in here so we can get this thing back on the ground and see if it moves. All right, guys, old transmission, new transmission is installed. Got parts everywhere. So the interesting thing, you always find other issues. Well, typically you'll find other issues when you go in to do one job, then you got to do another. Our first issue was the fact that there was no flanges off the H-pipe. So we had to cut that and put band clamps on. But hey, for the next guy, hopefully it's not me, but you never know. It'll be, at least you can remove the H-pipe. Another thing that we noticed is the throw bearing was installed in properly on the clutch fork. The spring clip was going around the outside of the bearing, or it was supposed to be on the inside, so we fixed that. And lastly, look at this O2 sensor, not in the greatest shape. Not sure if that was reading or doing anything at all. So now everything is tight. I've double checked everything, plugged in the O2s, plugged in our reverse switch, speedo cables plugged in. All our bolts for the transmission are tight. The cross member for the transmission is all bolted up and tight. We got our drive shaft all bolted up. So everything should be good to go. We got fluid in the transmission, the shifter's reinstalled. So I'm gonna go ahead now, get the car back down on the ground, and then we're gonna set the timing because I did replace that distributor. I did kind of, you know, I got it on the right tooth and the car starts, but I'm gonna go ahead, start it up. We'll get the timing set, and then from there, we'll take this thing out for a drive and see how it drives now that there's actually a rotor underneath the distributor cap. So let's go ahead, get the car down. We'll set the timing, and maybe this car is going to run the way that it was before. Boom, have it pretty much perfect. Honestly guys, your TFI module should always be at around this 5 o'clock area. If it's cranked all the way over here or up against your thermostat, then chances are things are off a little bit, and you might want to pull your distributor out and redo your top dead center. Just going out for a little test drive here. We'll see how all the gears work. Thinking it was just that rotor. Obviously it's going to make things misbehave. Can you imagine just random spark bouncing around underneath the cap and just sparks going everywhere in your car trying to run? Like, I could only imagine what the result of that would be. Get out on this little stretch of road here and should be able to make sure everything up through 5th gear works, sorry. So what I'm probably going to do is drive the car around for the next couple days. He's down in San Antonio anyways. And just make sure that everything with the car continues to perform the way that it should. Hell, if it drives like this, he's gonna have absolutely nothing to worry about. I did notice the one is skirt in the back, the bracket off the rear bumper is loose where it's riveted onto the body, so I need to fix that. But otherwise, so far so good. This car's running nice. There we go. Our test drive was successful. Car's running good. All the gears and the transmission works. All that because of that rotor. Unbelievable, right? Like, sometimes we really need to not underestimate how easy a fix and a solution can be sometimes. Like, he thought he had a bad motor, he thought all of these things, and your mind just automatically goes there. It's like a natural thing that we go through. It's just like, oh, what's that sound? What's that noise? Oh, it's not running right. You know, motor must be bad, and that's where we want to go. But we found that solution. Unfortunately, the transmission had to get changed for no reason. You know, that was 100% avoidable. It sucks, but at the end of the day, it's better than ultimately actually having a bad motor or having an issue there, which clearly is not the case. Car's running good. Notice the LED popped out of the housing here and the turn signal, so I'm gonna have to pop this light out and fix that for him. And so I was underneath the car. Here, the bracket that holds the lower part of the GT rear skirt on. Need to get that fixed on there. So there you have it, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode of the Infamous Project. As always, thank you for your support and for tuning in. Until next time, we'll see you back here on the Infamous Project.